I am being watched. Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest Season 1, Episode 22. It's called No Good Deed. So spoilers for the episode, and it's the penultimate episode of the season, in fact. And it suitably feels quite big, in that our person of interest is actually scratching at the surface of what the machine is, which is it's a big reveal about maybe a third into the episode or so. Where Finch realizes that this is why this guy's in trouble with the government, is because he's asking questions that are actually going to lead to the machine and the fact that it exists. But we'll get into all that. We'll get into the flashbacks. We get more flashbacks with Finch and Ingram, and it's kind of the end. We're getting towards the end of that timeline where the flashbacks are in 2009 now, just before they hand the machine over to the government permanently, and it feels like we got the reasons in this episode why Ingram is probably going to be killed. We don't see it in this episode. I suspect either we'll see it or we'll see Finch's reaction to finding out that it's happened in a flashback. Probably next episode. It'll probably be in the finale. It feels like this through line of who Finch and Ingram were as a pair, and the story of bringing the machine online and sending it to the government. It's very much been a through line throughout this season. So I'd be very surprised if they save that for season 2. Which is not to say that I don't think we'll get any more flashbacks of Finch in season 2. But I think it's possible there's still more interesting stuff to fill in. But this episode certainly reveals a lot, and even Reese is investigating and following him around again, trying to figure out just where he lives for a start. Never mind anything else. But perhaps most interestingly to us is how he's getting the numbers from the machine. Now, this is something that I never really thought about much. I just kind of assumed he got them at the computer, right? And I think that's what most people probably assumed early in the show. It never even felt like something we had to ask necessarily. But there's a scene early on in this episode where Reese is following Finch, and he's buying a magazine, he's getting a coffee or whatever, and then he goes over to a payphone, and he's on the payphone for not long, right? He doesn't even say anything. He's only on the payphone for maybe like 15 seconds. Doesn't say a word. And then as soon as he hangs up, he calls Reese and says he has a number. So Reese does some investigating later on where he's looking at the bottom of the coffee cup. He's looking at the magazines, thinking it's somehow in code in one of these things. But I think for the audience, it's pretty clear that the number came from the phone. The machine's calling him. The question I have now is, does it have to be a payphone? If it has to, does it have to be that specific payphone? Can it be any landline? I don't know. I guess that's something we'll delve into more as the show goes on. By all means, don't spoil any of those questions. I'm theorizing based on where we are on the show right now. I'm assuming that the show will clarify that as time goes on. But this was very interesting because we've been kind of mostly away from talking about the machine and what it is for a little while now. I think the last big episode, well, we had the flashbacks with Reese where it seemed like what they were doing in the past with his handler was connected to the machine in some way. But I think the last time we were really talking about the machine as a concept in a big way was the last time we had flashbacks with Reese and Finch, and they caught someone, or they proved to the government they could catch someone with it. And there were some interesting ideas brought up in there, especially when you saw the machine's like POV, as it were, of all the screens. Because that's what we're seeing every episode. We're seeing the machine's POV as it's like going down the timeline and finding the signal that it wants to home in on and things like that. All that's very interesting. The idea of this phone, it feels like a big setup thing. It feels like we have something now that we're going to go back to probably. It wouldn't surprise me if the fact that Reese knows as much as he does now is in some way going to help later when he can't ask Finch for help, and it's going to turn out to be a good thing that he was being, for lack of a better word, nosy about who Finch is and where he's getting the information from. I did laugh actually when Reese tries to bring up where he gets the numbers from. Finch just really mockingly says, "Well, there's this thing called the machine." I got a good chuckle out of that. He was being really patronizing, and you don't want it too often, but a little bit every so often can be quite entertaining. So I enjoyed that. But the big thing here though is that one of the flashbacks, there's a little seed planted early on when Finch is talking to Ingram, Ingram's telling Finch that he should, maybe now that they're giving the machine away and they're never going to access it again, he should maybe focus on his personal life. He should go out and find someone. He should maybe start a family, things like that. And Finch has a little line where he says, "How do you know I haven't already?" And it seems that Finch has always been this super secretive person, because Ingram says, like, "I know you like your secrets, but I feel like if you had found someone, you'd probably never shut up about it." But that's actually the little moment where I went, I bet he has. I'm almost positive he has, based on this exchange, because I know what Finch is like at this point in the show. And sure enough, when Reese is investigating all these identical magazines that Finch keeps buying and is tracking sort of the location of where they're getting delivered, and it leads him to this place, and he knocks on the door thinking he might see Finch, and it's this woman whose name was Grace, and she seems very pleasant. So Reese is quick on his feet and whips out his police badge that he's been using and says, "Hey, I'm so and so. We're just investigating a complaint. There's nothing serious, blah blah." But he talks his way inside, right? In fact, he offers to help with the stack of magazines, and then gets inquisitive about it. Very naturally says, "Hey, this is a lot of copies of this thing. Like, are you a collector or something?" And it turns out that she's actually the artist who does the covers, and how it's becoming harder to find work in that line of work because everything's going digital. And hell, that was true in 2012. It's even more true in 2023. I mean, damn, like all we're doing now is talking about how AI is replacing this, never mind Photoshop. But it becomes this very quick thing with the photograph that's on the shelf, that she knows Howard, right? They're intimate, they look happy together, and Reese asks about who he is, and I thought it was quite forward. He's lucky she didn't get suspicious when he asked, quite frankly, but she gets quite sentimental about how he's this nice man that she met one day, and she never really had a chance to find anyone, and she was always in doing her work, which is kind of like Finch. They do different work, obviously, but they're both kind of loners in that sense. And they had 4 years together, but he passed away 2 years ago, and we know that's a lie, of course. But it's like we're learning something about Finch. And of course, the detail here that really sticks out is that she keeps, every time she thinks she's lost her job, there's always some company that needs her to do work. And she actually says the line, "It seems like I've got a guardian angel." And yeah, I'm pretty sure Finch, he probably intentionally buys publications just so he can hire her with all of his fortune. But yeah, that was a fun little bit. But Reese comes out the building, and of course Finch is sitting across the road at the park, and Reese even points out, "Hey, like, this is the perfect location to sometimes like keep an eye on how she's doing, but it's busy enough that you can easily stay out of sight and not get caught." We find out that he did all this because and this relates to the main story in the episode as well, about the well, we think it's like a is that like a financial advisor or something at first, but it turns out to be like an NSA intelligence analyst or something like that. But this idea that knowing about the machine is like a virus you have to stop spreading, because the government, the people who know about it, will kill anyone to stop it, because it is illegal that this thing exists, right? And part of the way that Finch and Ingram made it more moral is the idea that no human can ever actually look at the information. The machine only gives out the things that are needed and relevant to someone in danger or a crisis of some kind. Basically says that he's patient zero, and that the idea that he would be in danger if anyone ever figured out that he was the one who built it. Of course, he's done a great job of keeping that secret. More on that in a minute. But the idea that he didn't want to risk her ever being put in danger. I love a couple of things about this scene. I love that Finch doesn't get angry at Reese for looking into this. I think he understands why he had to keep looking, and that this was maybe inevitable. But I also love that Reese can kind of relate to him in a lot of ways. This idea of leaving the person you love behind to have a life without you that's safer. It's not one-to-one what he did, of course, with his love interest, but it's close enough that you can understand that he gets what he's saying, that he can relate to it, he can sympathize with it, and it's kind of a sweet scene that sort of bonds them a little bit closer. These are two guys that are technically meant to either not exist or be dead or whatever, and it's this lonely life, but they've kind of found each other, and that's kind of sweet. The bromance blossoms yet again. We continue. It's all very nice. So it just further establishes they need each other. On Finch being very good at keeping the secret, right? And this goes back to Ingram. It goes back to the flashbacks. Is that when Ingram meets Alicia, the woman who was kind of like brokering this whole turnover of the machine on behalf of the government, he at one point says only 8 people know about the machine and we have to keep it that way. And then she looks terrified and says, 7 people know. And he's like, yeah, you always knew I was bad at maths, but obviously he's counting Finch. She doesn't know that, she thinks Ingram's the one who's done this, right? She doesn't know about Finch. And that was an interesting little slip to me, because he could have just, if he just phrased it differently to keep himself safe, like, there's a short list of people who know about this machine, we have to keep it that way. Totally in the clear. But this was like this seed, and I thought this was going to lead to him getting killed, because they were going to think he told someone, and that's the way this scene kind of teased that it might be going down. Obviously, later on, it seems like this is a tease to her to go look for someone like Finch, and that's seemingly what she's done at the end of the episode. She's caught Finch talking about the machine on tape. That's the cliffhanger. But I thought this was a great little scene as well. I think Finch's flashbacks, like, I've enjoyed Reese's flashbacks in so much that they have informed who he is, but I've enjoyed his story way more in the present day of how his flashbacks or how his backstory is affecting his decisions now. This path of a redemptive man who's done some bad things, who is fighting for atonement, is more interesting than actually giving me, in most cases, the actual events that he feels regret over. In the case of Reese, I think Finch's flashbacks have been constantly kind of fascinating, because the origin of the machine's so interesting, and then the character and how he's changed since then. Because especially in this episode, we see quite clearly it's not Finch who is worried about the little people, as it were, who are not getting saved when their number comes through. It's Ingram. It's Nathan Ingram who's saying, where do we draw this line? We can't, like, this is awful. Like, you know, that's how he starts talking about finding a family, because he doesn't think Finch can relate to caring about someone, and everyone matters to someone. So all these numbers that we're ignoring are important. And not only that, it seems to be Ingram who builds this back door, this contingency. And I assume that's what lets this information get to Finch. Like, I mean, we don't know this for sure, but I'm just going to kind of leap to the assumption here that because of what Ingram does behind Finch's back in this episode to build in this back door, I'm going to assume that's the only reason why Finch is even able to get the numbers that he does. And obviously the fact that Ingram's going to end up dead, probably for doing this, or letting slip that someone else knows about the machine, whatever the reason may be, the guilt of that is partly what's driving Finch. So, you know, Finch and Reese are both driven by guilt in some form. Again, different scenarios, different things happened, but this idea of fighting redemption, making them almost invaluable, just of how good they're trying to be now, like making up for these past actions, is making them such a force for good for everyone else who are now benefiting from it. You could argue that even by the end of season 1, they have more than paid off their guilt debt, if you will. But we're going to keep going, right? We're going to keep going, and I think the character progression of both of these two has been really well handled and fascinating throughout the season. And how they're both kind of giving each other something they need, but as time goes on, becoming a little bit more trusting and a little bit more, like I say, the bromance blossoms. And of course, most of this reflects very well into the main person of interest of this episode, and it's a really cool little story, because in some ways this feels like a really old school episode. I know it feels weird to say that because we're only at the end of season 1, but you know, like the season, when it was establishing what it was for the first several episodes, I think a lot of this case feels like it's one of those, except with the twist of what the person's actually involved in, making it more layered and far more connected to the overall idea of the show. In particular, this idea that he's also technically a spy and knows how to cover his tracks. So that makes Reese and Finch's jobs a little bit more difficult. They have to not rely on the same, because we've seen them do the trick where they clone the phone and just tap into their phone over and over again, right? And that's not a complaint. It makes sense they'd keep using that tactic. It's the most straightforward thing. But they have to resort to a traditional bug or tracker in this episode and things like that. So that's quite fascinating. The idea that Reese goes into the building and tries to bluff his way around, but it's quite clear that the receptionist is holding a gun under the desk, and it's like, oh shit, this place is not what it claims to be. This is something secretive, and it turns out to be an NSA office of some kind. And all that stuff's fascinating, but the idea that the victim in this episode is only a victim because he's asking genuinely good questions. He's not actually doing anything wrong. The character in this episode, Henry Peck, he notices that his reports are having additions added later. But what's weirder to him is that when he's looking at these reports later that have had added like names or people of interest put into them, is that they end up being the linchpin in catching someone or stopping some terrorist or whatever it may be. It's someone's inserting things that he's not putting in the reports that's being instrumental in taking down someone bad or stopping something bad. And of course, as soon as he says that, I think most of the audience are going to clock what it is. They're going to, because Finch has this realization when he hears him talk about it, but we get a little bit of it before that, and I think it is quite clear that it's the machine. Not that the machine is the one doctor in his documents, but whoever's getting the information from the machine of who to look into, part of the cover-up of this machine existing is to create a paper trail where this information to go after X target or whoever it may be is coming, it goes back to a document somewhere. It's going back to a piece of intelligence that never actually existed. It's a complete fabrication, but they're trying to backdate the information so that if anyone looks into anything, even though the only people who could look into this are people who are already high level and have a lot of clearance, but it's so top secret that this machine exists, and so much of the government can't know that it exists, that they have to give like a reasonable top secret paper trail to anything they do or any information they act upon that they get from the machine. And because this Peck character is noticing that his documents are being changed, he starts asking about it, and very quickly he is targeted for assassination for that reason. And I think that's a fascinating premise to an episode, because he's a good guy. He's not doing anything wrong. He's questioning something that he should be questioning under any normal circumstances. He should wonder why his documents, especially when they're important documents, are being forged with extra names. But everyone wants to take him out for it. And recent Finch is even adamant for a lot of this episode that he can't even know they exist. Like, they have to try and help him without ever talking to him, because then they have to explain who they are, and it puts him one step closer to knowing more about what the machine is and that it exists. And as we find out in the episode, when he's at the police station, which by the way led to my biggest laugh of the whole episode, he, because he intentionally gets himself arrested, he keeps dodging Reese as well as the assassin, and he gets himself arrested by throwing a bottle at a police car and is like basically begging to be arrested, and he's got some proof on him. It cuts to him at the station, and he's talking about like the only way this information could exist that they're using to catch people is if there's some massive illegal, surveillance system in play. And he sort of stops, and because he's talking about how much manpower that would take, it'd be even bigger than all of the organizations that exist in the US. And then he realizes, wait a minute, holy shit, they built it. And he's like, yeah, after 9/11, like, the government wanted to build a machine, but they could never quite get it working. But he sort of realizes that it must exist in some form, even if it wasn't the one that he knew about that failed. Some version of it obviously is now existing. That's the conclusion he comes to. And he has this realization, and the camera cuts and finally reveals who he's talking to, and it's Fusco, who's like So do you want a cup of coffee or something? I just I got such a big laugh over Fusco not giving a shit about anything he just said, that it doesn't mean anything to him. It was perfect. You know, Fusco can be funny at times, and that was a perfect use of a character. Also, my favorite little gag in this episode is that Carter keeps looking suspiciously at Fusco because she remembers what the corrupt cops said before, and she's like sort of looking at him like all shifty, like he's always on the phone. Is he talking to someone? And Fusco's actually trying to get Reese involved because he's meeting some of the heads of HR next week. And he's like, "Hey, it's our chance to take them down. Come on, Reese." So we'll see if Reese actually goes through with that next episode, because that sounds like set up for next episode. So I assume that's what they're going to do with it. So yeah, I mean the actual plot with Peck is mostly entertaining. The assassin, there's like three guys that are working as a team, but there's one main assassin that you see mostly, who kind of looked like the beard and the hair made me think he was like discount Chuck Norris. Admittedly, Chuck Norris wasn't a great actor, so he's probably a better actor than Chuck Norris, so it maybe feels a bit harsh to call him the discount Chuck Norris. But he is, because he reminds me of Chuck Norris, but he's not Chuck Norris. So even though he might be better than Chuck Norris, he's the discount Chuck Norris. Sometimes the discount version of something's the better option. Not always, it's rare, but it can happen. It's not out of the realm of possibility. But there's a couple of fun sequences. There's a sequence where Peck breaks back into his office to try and get evidence. This is right before he gets arrested. And the assassin comes in, and Reese is trying to keep his distance, but when he sees that he's about to be killed, he jumps in. Because of course he does, and he intervenes. And I actually quite like this shootout scene because, he's just kind of like fighting the guy. He's shooting like from behind a pillar. The other three guys have all got machine guns. And I appreciated, I think, here just the play, the way they played with where the characters were, and it's a simple little thing, but Peck runs away. He doesn't stay to be saved. He just kind of he just bolts for the door, and when he does, the assassin sort of turn to him, so it gives Reese a chance to sort of just jump out and just shoot them. And he just sort of grabs the one guy that he's already killed. He grabs his machine gun and just kind of like fires it across the. I thought it was a good use of the geography in a very quick scene. It didn't last very long, but the simple idea of like, I knew where the bad guys were. I knew where Reese and Peck were. Peck was kind of reckless in the way he just ran for it, and it kind of created this diversion, but also a chance for Reese to. I don't know. It played out very nicely. There's also a fun sequence where, after Reese gets him out of the police station, he takes him in a taxi cab, and that taxi cab gets shot at with a big caliber sniper rifle and ends up blowing up. So we get a fight with Reese and the assassin that takes place in front of this burning taxi cab, which may not sound like a big deal, but it was a good visual. It kind of, it reminds you that the show knows how to make use of its budget to make it feel like it's got some big set piece moments. Just having that visual in the background just looked quite good, I thought. It was really making use of all of its locations this episode. There was a lot of stuff out in the streets when they were tailing them, things like that. So all that stuff was entertaining. The big conclusion to it, though, is that Finch realizes that Peck is not someone who's going to give up. This is someone, as they find out earlier in the episode, wrote an 80-something page letter to explain why he shouldn't get a speeding ticket. So Finch comes and sees him, right? Peck's going to talk to our journalist, and we know that assassins are coming for him, but Reese apparently has taken out those assassins, and Finch just sits down at the table instead and explains, you know what, you're never going to stop asking the question, you're never going to stop looking, so I'm just going to tell you, the machine exists. Now you can stop asking, right? Here's a passport, here's a new name, here's some money, there's a bank account, and your new name, go and live a life, but you can't look into this, you can't do any of this, because it will just lead to your death, it'll lead to the death of people around you, so on and so on. And it's all very good, and I was actually wondering, as the scene was playing out, I was thinking, is he going to admit that he built it? Because eventually Peck says the question, how do you know all this? And he does just straight up say, because I built it. And I think, because Finch even says in the scene, that he is saying all this to him because he kind of reminds him of himself. And this inquisitive nature, this desire to keep going, he knows he's not going to give up. So the only way to convince him to actually go and just live this new life on his own, away from danger, is to give him the answer that he's looking for. But there's no solution to this other than just running away and staying out of the radar of the people who were looking for him. Which, on that subject, we cut a couple times in this episode to the person who is ordering this hit. We have someone in Washington who is... We only see him sitting at a desk, but he's got a very memorable face, actually. I feel like I've seen the actor in something before. Let me see if I can... J.O. Sanders, I want to say? This was this guy? Yeah, it's this actor. He's been in a bunch of stuff, but it looks of it. He was in The Day After Tomorrow, of all things. But he's a character actor. He shows up in a lot of things. He's very memorable, but that felt like an introduction of a character we're going to see again. This is the person who's, at the very least, trying to keep tabs on any information about the machine spreading, if not just straight up the person who is dishing out the orders based on what the machine is giving out. That seemed to be the vibe, because he's a shadowy desk. All these scenes are in kind of like relative low lighting and darkness. Very intimidating. They're definitely going for a vibe with this character, so very curious to see where they go with more of that. But like I said earlier, the big thing here is that at the end of the episode, after Finch and Reese have their heart-to-heart and we have our final flashbacks and we see Ingram putting in the contingency back door and all that stuff, because as he pointed out, like, they're about to hand it off to the government. This is the last chance they'll ever have to put in anything else, like to tinker with it and give themselves some sort of option later. So, very interesting. Also interesting that Finch makes it very clear here that the machine maintains itself, it updates itself, and evolves effectively, which I feel like is going to be important. I feel like this machine is going to be a lot more advanced than what Finch originally created via that. Like, the idea that it's evolving over time with all the information that it's tracking and keeping a hold of. But anyway, as I said earlier, Alicia, who was in the episode previously, not just in the flashback reminded us that she existed, and then we actually see her be phoned by Peck at one point. He tries to get information about the machine, and she gives him like a word. I've forgotten what the word is now. It was like, it was kind of like surveillance, but it wasn't. It was surveillance. It was something like that. It was a weird word, but it was kind of just something to send him on a path. And notably, his documents, which burned up in the taxi, Carter ends up with the remains of them, and that word is the only thing she can make out. Because early in the episode, when they're asking Carter for help, as soon as Finch realizes this is related to the machine, and that's what the guy's asking questions about, as soon as he becomes aware of that, he tells Carter that they've solved it and that they don't need their help. He shuts her out immediately, because he doesn't want Carter to find out about the machine, or Fusco either for that matter. But he just immediately cuts her out the second he's aware that this is about the machine. But now we have this character Alicia, who showed up at the end, and of course we saw her in present day before. We saw that one time. It was when Ingram's son went to speak to her, and she was clearly very twitchy, very scared. She's obviously no longer in the government or working where she was. And clearly she wants to use this recording of Finch saying that he says the sentence on tape, "I built the machine." He says that at the end of this, and that's what the ending reveals. That feels like it's going to be a big deal, probably for next episode. I feel like a lot of the things this episode sets up feels like kind of a two-parter to me. Between setting up in the flashbacks the end of the Ingram story, this cliffhanger of recording Finch saying that, and even Fusco saying, hey, this HR meeting's next week, where we're going to get to see who these guys are. Those all feel like things we're going to be dealing with next episode. Just because they all feel like set up for the finale to me. So I'm not saying it's an actual two-parter, but there's a lot of little things that feel kind of two-parter-esque in the makeup of the episode. But no, it's very good. Very good. So yeah, if I hadn't made that clear, yeah, it was an excellent episode. I think the character stuff with Finch and Reese is really paying off now that we're late in the season and they've spent all the time building it up. The idea that we can do something like reveal that Finch had a love life recently, relatively recently, 2 years ago, feels justified because we've spent all season saying how secretive he is and how no one knows where he actually lives, and he's always keeping these different identities. When Reese figured out where he was working at a day job as a cover, where he wasn't the one in charge, even though he technically owned the company, he immediately burned that identity. This is something they've been setting up. Obviously, we might get to a point where he doesn't feel he has to burn an identity because Reese knows about it, but, progress is coming. It feels that way anyway. He opens up to him quite a bit this episode. That stuff was very satisfying. I think the action scenes in this episode were quite solid. Both the shootout in the office building and the stuff by the taxi, I think, were very entertaining. And then the little seeds for stuff with Carter and Fusco reacting to Peck was a really funny scene. It was a really packed episode with a lot of good things all clicking, and put me in a really good mood for the finale, which I'm really looking forward to watching for next time. But that is my thoughts on the penultimate episode of the season, A Person of Interest. You can let me know what you think of this episode in the comments. Of course, you can subscribe, all those things help out a lot and help people find the show. But of course, if you want to go one step further, you can support us over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. It helps keeps the lights on, it'll help keep everything coming, and you get bonus stuff, including a monthly bonus review of Columbo, which episode 3 of which should be out soon. So if that sounds interesting, if you want my thoughts on an older school show, then go check it out on Patreon. But that is me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?